The cafeteria buzzed with restless energy trays, clattering voices echoing against cold walls, and 4 cadets walked in like they owned the place, their boots striking rhythm on the tiles, their laughter sharp and confident. They spotted her alone, at a corner table staring into her coffee, and they knew, right then they had found their next bit of entertainment. But something in her stillness made the air heavier, and one of them whispered, "Maybe she's new. Maybe she doesn't know who we are." They moved closer, their shadows stretching over the table, and she did not flinch. Her gaze stayed fixed on the coffee like it held secrets none of them could touch. Morales leaned forward, his elbow brushing the edge of the table as if to claim it. His grin wide and teeth showing, Green chuckled softly, glancing at the others, signaling this was going to be easy. Tanaka shifted uneasily, feeling the heat of the afternoon pressing down on the cafeteria, and Phillips drummed his fingers on the table, pretending confidence, while his stomach knotted tight with unease. The woman did not look up. She simply closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slow and deep, like she owned the rhythm of the room. The chatter around them seemed to fade. Her calm was like a stone sinking in a river. The cadets could not pull their attention away, and suddenly Green blurted out, "Who are you, new here?" Or just passing through. The words came out sharp. But she did not answer. She only opened her eyes, and they caught a glint that made the 4 hesitate for the briefest instant, like the world had shifted under their feet. Morales laughed nervously, brushing imaginary dust from his uniform, and leaned back. But he could not shake the feeling that she had already noticed something about them, something beyond appearances, beyond rank, beyond anything he had ever felt before. Tanaka cleared his throat, trying to steer the conversation into something lighter, but the words stuck in his throat. As he caught a flicker of movement across the cafeteria, as if the walls themselves were watching them, and Phillips swallowed hard, wishing he had stayed behind with the others instead of stepping into this quiet storm. The cadets began to talk faster, words tumbling over each other, trying to fill the silence that the woman had made. She tilted her head slightly and smiled faintly, as if she knew every thought racing through their minds before they even realized it, and that smile unsettled them. More than any shout or glare could have, Green tried to make a joke about the senior officers imagining her as a visitor who would never know the truth. But the joke died on his lips as she raised a hand, and his heart skipped a beat, because the movement was calm and deliberate, and it felt like a warning around them. The cafeteria seemed to bend inward. The conversations faded into a hum, and the light over their heads flickered briefly like a shadow had passed between them, and Morales felt a chill run down his spine. He leaned closer to whisper something to Tanaka, but the words stuck his tongue dry and his throat tight as he noticed the faint scar that ran along the side of her wrist, partially hidden under her sleeve, and he realized it was not just a mark. It was a sign that this woman had seen things they could not imagine. The 4 exchanged glances, none of them wanting to admit the fear creeping into their bones. And yet it was there. Green shifted his weight uneasily, as if he could escape by moving just a little, and Phillips felt sweat prickling along the back of his neck, while Morales tried to maintain control over the conversation, pretending to be bold, but hearing the faint click of her tablet shutting and the soft thud of her hands against the table made his confidence crumble, and Tanaka felt the room tilt slightly, as if the ceiling had dropped closer. Then she spoke softly, a voice low and even like a knife cutting through the fog of their bravado. She asked why they were here, and the question was not casual. It carried weight. It carried expectation. It carried a kind of authority that none of them had expected in a stranger, and the words made them pause, their mouths open and closed like fish out of water struggling to find air, and for the first time the laughter that had marked their entrance was gone, replaced by a tight silence that hummed with tension. The cafeteria itself seemed to respond, her presence commanding the space. Tables shifting slightly in the corner of their vision chairs, scraping softly against the tile like whispers, warning them to be careful, and yet no one else seemed to notice the change. only the four cadets, and they felt trapped inside a moment that stretched on endlessly, as if the universe itself had slowed down to watch what they would do next. Morales tried to regain control, leaning forward with a forced grin, attempting a story about the academy drills, about long nights, about being too tired to care. And she listened without interrupting, her gaze steady and piercing, as if each word was being weighed, measured, and stored for some reckoning. Only she knew was coming, and as he spoke, the air seemed to thicken, pressing against their skin, and a strange pressure settled in their chests, making each breath feel borrowed, and the cafeteria lights flickered again as if confirming their fear. Green shifted in his seat, trying to lighten the mood, mentioning a rumor he had heard about the new commanding officer, trying to tease a smile from her face. But instead her eyes narrowed slightly, just enough to make him freeze like a deer caught in headlights. And he realized that whatever game he thought they were playing was over before it had begun, and Phillips could feel the pulse of the room synchronizing with his heartbeat every beat, a loud reminder that they had stepped into a place far beyond their reckoning. Tanaka tried to excuse himself, pretending he needed to check on something outside the cafeteria, but his legs would not move. They felt rooted to the ground. And when he looked at her, she tilted her head as if reading his hesitation, and he knew she understood every intention before it had formed, fully in his mind, and a cold certainty settled in his stomach that this encounter was not going to end with simple embarrassment. It was going to mark something permanent in the way they thought about themselves, about authority, about fear, and the unknown. The clatter of trays from another table seemed suddenly louder, a rhythmic pounding that echoed their racing hearts, and they all noticed for the first time how silent the other cadets had become, eyes darting in their direction, whispering, not to them, but about them, and the presence of the woman created a kind of vacuum, drawing all attention. Her calm, unyielding focus radiating like a storm cloud over them, and they sat frozen, unable to escape the gravity of her gaze or the weight of the secret she carried. A shadow passed over her face, and the four felt it like a shiver down their spines, a shift in the room that made the air taste metallic and heavy. Their instincts screamed to leave, to run, to do anything but they could. Not move. The cafeteria had become a trap, and every sound, every movement, every breath seemed magnified as if the walls themselves were listening. Their past bravado replaced by an intense awareness that one wrong word, one wrong glance could unleash something beyond their comprehension. Morales swallowed hard and tried to speak again, but the words would not come. The lump in his throat growing heavier with each heartbeat, and Green glanced at him desperate for some distraction, some absurdity, to break the tension, but even his mind went blank. Phillips felt the sweat running down his back, soaking his uniform, as if the fear had taken tangible form, and Tanaka could feel every fiber of his being screaming in protest at the realization that they had no idea who they were dealing with. And the woman still sat there, serene and unyielding, her eyes catching each detail, recording each movement like she had seen it all before. The sunlight shifting through the windows created strange patterns on the floor dancing around their feet. And for a moment, they imagined shadows moving independently of the bodies that cast them, a warning or a hint or a sign of something deeper, lurking just beyond sight. And the woman finally lifted her hand, her fingers brushing against the edge of the table, and in that small movement the room seemed to tighten around them, and the four knew instinctively that nothing would ever be the same again, and they would have to face the truth of what they had just stumbled into before it was too late. The cafeteria felt smaller somehow, as if the walls had shifted inward, pressing closer with every heartbeat, and the four cadets could feel it crushing the confidence they had brought with them. Their bravado fading like smoke in the wind, and she remained seated calm, unmovable, serene, as if she were the eye of a storm, and they were trapped in the chaos around her. Morales finally opened his mouth trying to speak, but the words refused to form his tongue thick and heavy as if the air itself had turned to stone, and Green leaned back nervously, his fingers tapping on the table, a rhythm that only reminded him how trapped he felt. Phillips fidgeted with the edge of his uniform, wishing he could vanish, and Tanaka could feel the hairs on his arms standing upright as a cold pressure settled over the four of them like a storm waiting to strike. Then she looked up, her eyes scanning them slowly, deliberately, each movement precise and intentional. Her gaze locking onto Morales first, and he felt it like electricity shooting through his chest. She tilted her head slightly, and a faint smirk tugged at her lips, but it was not a friendly smile. It was a smile that promised knowledge of everything they had tried to hide, and she spoke softly, a voice low and cutting straight into their thoughts, asking them if they truly understood what respect meant. The words hung in the air, and the four cadets felt their stomachs drop as if gravity itself had changed. Green tried to laugh nervously, pretending he understood the question, but the sound came out hollow and cracking, and the other cadets froze, their eyes darting between each other, searching for a plan or an escape that did not exist. And in that moment they realized they were utterly exposed, vulnerable to a presence far greater than themselves. She leaned forward, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, and the shadows in the cafeteria seemed to stretch toward her, as if drawn by some invisible force, and Phillips felt his chest tighten, every breath a struggle, as if the air had thickened, and Tanaka could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, each beat echoing like a drum, signaling an unknown danger approaching. And Morales tried to keep his composure, but the small tremor in his hands betrayed the fear coursing through him. Around them, the other cadets whispered quietly, their eyes wide, but none dared approach the table, the air between them crackling with tension. As if some silent signal had passed that marked the four as different, and the woman did not flinch at their stares. She remained focused on the four in front of her like a predator studying her prey, and a strange shiver ran down Green's spine as he realized the cafeteria was no longer just a room. It had become a trap designed to expose every weakness. Morales swallowed hard, trying to force a joke about drills or inspections, but the words died before they left his mouth, and she tilted her head a fraction watching him struggle, and the silence was unbearable. Every tick of the clock magnified every scrape of a chair sharp and cutting, and the four could feel a kind of pressure building like a storm on the horizon, ready to crash down on them without warning. And in that moment, they knew their lives had shifted into a new reality, one they could not reverse. Phillips tried to break the tension with a casual remark about the food, something absurd to distract her, but her gaze did not waver. It locked on him, and he felt it boring into his chest as if she could see through every lie. Every thought and a cold realization washed over him that none of them could hide anything from her, and Tanaka felt a cold sweat run down his back, realizing that the fear he felt was not just intimidation, it was knowledge that they had stepped into a place far beyond their understanding. Suddenly, a shadow moved near the entrance, a figure passing silently unnoticed by everyone else, but the four felt it as a ripple in the air, a presence that did not belong, and the woman's eyes flicked toward the movement almost imperceptibly, and it was enough to make Green stiffen his shoulders and glance toward the door. And in that instant, a low hum seemed to fill the room, vibrating through the tiles, through the chairs, through their bones, and the four cadets understood instinctively that the calm they had mistaken for normal was an illusion, and the storm was only beginning. Morales tried to regain control, leaning forward, pretending to assert authority, but every movement felt clumsy, weak, inadequate against the quiet force before him, and she raised a hand, a small gesture that caused the hum to deepen, and the cafeteria lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the walls and floors, like fingers reaching out toward them, warning them, waiting for a misstep. And he felt a wave of nausea wash over him. the first true sign that fear had taken full control. Tanaka looked down at the table edge, gripping it tightly, feeling his fingernails dig into the surface as if the pain could anchor him in reality. But the sensation was fleeting, the pressure from her presence crushing every thought, and he realized that whatever games he had played with his confidence, his strength, his wit were meaningless. Here, and the four of them were exposed, stripped bare to the skill and experience of someone who had faced far greater trials than they could imagine. The woman leaned back slightly, but the aura of command around her did not lessen. It grew stronger, stronger still, making the air in the cafeteria thick with tension, and every cadet who glanced toward the table felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. A recognition of authority so potent it was nearly physical, and Phillips felt his knees weaken, and Green's hands trembled against the table, and Morales could barely hold eye contact, as if the act itself required a courage he did not possess. Then she spoke. Again, her voice softer this time, like a whisper sliding under their skin, and it carried a weight that made the cafeteria fall silent around them. She asked them if they knew what it meant to underestimate someone, and the words struck deeper than any insult or command, and in that instant the four cadets understood with a chilling clarity that they had underestimated her completely, and the cost of that misjudgment would be more than embarrassment. It would shape their futures in ways they could not yet see. A sudden movement in the corner caught their eyes. A tray tipped over another cadet, dropping a utensil, the sound sharp and echoing like a gunshot, and for a moment every one of the four flinched, their bodies rigid as if expecting an attack to descend from above, and she remained perfectly still, watching them with a faint smile, the kind that promised consequences that could not yet be imagined, and they realized fully that they were on the edge of something far larger than themselves, something invisible and inevitable that would not allow them to leave the cafeteria unchanged. Morales tried to speak again, words stammering in his throat, but she raised a finger slowly and the room seemed to pulse in response, the tiles vibrating beneath their boots, the air thickening like syrup, and a shiver ran down Green's spine as he imagined the stories, the whispers, the tales that must have surrounded her presence, and a cold sweat prickled on the back of Philip's neck, as he realized that everything they had assumed about authority, about power, about respect, had been rewritten in these few minutes, and there was no turning back. Tanaka swallowed hard, feeling his chest tighten. Every breath a labor, and the shadows, stretching across the walls, seemed to shift subtly, pointing toward the table, as if marking them for some unknown reckoning, and the four felt themselves drawn into a vortex of silence and focus and anticipation, and for a brief moment, the cafeteria felt endless, a vast space where only they existed, and only she existed, and the air around them hummed with the promise of revelation and the weight of secrets waiting to be revealed. And then she leaned forward again, her eyes locking onto each of them in turn, scanning them like a soldier scanning a battlefield, and the four could not look away, every instinct telling them to flee, to hide, to disappear, but their bodies refused to obey, and a strange sound came from somewhere deep in the back of the room. A low vibration like the earth itself, warning them to pay attention to the words that were coming next. And they all knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same again, and the next words she spoke would decide what kind of cadets they would become, and whether they would survive this encounter intact. The cafeteria seemed to shrink around them, shadows stretching long across the floor, as if the walls themselves were closing in, and the four cadets could feel their courage slipping like sand through their fingers, every heartbeat louder than the last, and the woman remained still, her eyes unblinking, scanning them one by one like a predator, assessing the weakness in her prey, and every muscle in their bodies tensed as if bracing for a storm. They could not see. Morales tried to gather his thoughts, his lips moving but no sound emerged. His mind blank as the weight of her presence pressed on him, and Green shifted uneasily in his seat, glancing at the doorway, wishing some escape route existed, but the sense of inevitability was overwhelming, and Phillips felt a cold sweat trickle down his spine, his uniform sticking to his back, and Tanaka gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white, every nerve screaming at him to run, yet unable to move as if invisible chains held them in place. Then she spoke a single word, slowly, deliberately, a word that carried an authority beyond anything they had ever encountered, and it echoed inside their heads, louder than the ambient noise of the cafeteria, stronger than their own racing thoughts, and it was enough to stop every attempt at bravado, every joke, every nervous gesture that had kept them from truly realizing the danger of this moment, and for a second, the room itself felt suspended between breaths, a tense pause on the edge of revelation. Morales swallowed hard, trying to speak a response, but his throat constricted. His voice, trapped inside him, like it had never existed, and Green could feel his knees weakening as he tried to understand what had just passed between them, as if she had communicated an entire history with a single motion, a single tone of voice. And Phillips felt a chill creeping up his spine like icy fingers tracing the outline of his fear, and Tanaka realized that every instinct he had relied upon was useless. Here useless against the quiet power of someone who had faced far greater challenges than they could imagine. A tray tipped over in the distance, a loud clatter that made every cadet in the room flinch, and the sound seemed to resonate directly in their chests, amplifying the tension, the hum of anticipation growing heavier with every passing second, and the woman's gaze never wavered. Not for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the table, yet carrying a presence so commanding that it seemed to bend the very air around them, and they realized with a sudden clarity that nothing they had experienced before had prepared them for this encounter. Morales shifted, trying to regain composure, pretending confidence, but the effort was feeble, his body betraying him every slight movement, making him feel exposed, and Green's thoughts raced, searching for a distraction. Something absurd, anything to escape the intensity pressing against them, but nothing came. Nothing could break the invisible tether that held them to the table, and Phillips felt his stomach tighten, a cold knot that threatened to consume him entirely, and Tanaka felt a low thrum in his chest, like a drumbeat signaling a reckoning too large to comprehend. She leaned forward slowly, the slightest motion carrying the weight of command. The cafeteria lights flickering briefly, casting long, jagged shadows across their faces, and the four cadets could feel the temperature drop, a subtle shift that made the hairs on their arms rise and their hearts pound faster, as if the room itself had become alive, warning them of something hidden, something waiting, just out of sight, and every instinct told them to flee, yet they could not move. Morales tried again, words forming in his mind, but collapsing before they reached his lips. He could feel the eyes of the woman drilling into him, uncovering thoughts. He did not even know he had. Green swallowed hard, trying to force a laugh, but the sound died in his throat. Phillips gripped the edge of the table so tightly his fingers ached, and Tanaka felt a tension in his shoulders that spread down to his knees, making every movement impossible, and a realization settled like a stone in their stomachs that they were utterly exposed, completely vulnerable to someone whose presence alone demanded submission. The shadows seemed to creep closer, moving along the walls, inching toward them, and a faint vibration hummed beneath the floorboards, like the heartbeat of some unseen force pressing on their senses, and the woman's voice came again, low, soft, and deliberate, and every syllable cut through, the hum of tension making the air pulse around them, and the four cadets felt a cold wave wash over them, a mixture of fear and awe that left them paralyzed and fully aware that the next few moments could change everything. Phillips's vision flickered, the cafeteria lights stuttering overhead, casting strange moving patterns across the floor like claws reaching toward him. And Green felt his stomach twist as if the gravity of the room had changed, and every sound amplified, every movement magnified, and Morales realized his chest was tight, every breath shallow, and Tanaka felt an unfamiliar heat rise in his face, a mix of adrenaline and terror, as the presence of the woman intensified, surrounding them like an invisible cage, and they understood, instinctively, that she had known all along that they had underestimated her. She raised a hand slowly toward them, and the room seemed to lean in toward her, the air thickening with every second, every heartbeat of the 4 cadets echoing like a drum, signaling a reckoning they could not avoid, and the subtle movement of her fingers was enough to make Green flinch and Morales freeze. Phillips bite the inside of his cheek, and Tanaka's hands tremble, and the cafeteria became a pressure cooker, holding every emotion, every fear, every misjudgment they had brought with them. Then she spoke again, words cutting through the silence, sharp and deliberate. Her tone soft, yet filled with the weight of authority, the kind that left no room for argument or escape. And the 4 cadets could feel the meaning of each word sinking into their bones, reshaping their understanding of power and control. And they realized with chilling clarity that their entire view of leadership, respect, and courage was being challenged in this single encounter, and they had no choice but to submit to the gravity of her presence. A low hum rose again beneath their feet, a subtle vibration building in intensity, resonating with the fear that had gripped them, and the shadows seemed to twist and writhe across the walls, stretching toward the table as if to consume them or mark them for something unknown. And every cadet in the cafeteria who glanced at them felt a shift in the atmosphere, a quiet recognition of the authority radiating from the woman, and the 4 could feel themselves shrinking beneath it. The weight of her experience and her command pressing down on them like an invisible tide. Morales swallowed hard, his throat dry, and tried to speak once, more, but the words failed him completely. Green leaned back desperately, searching for some escape route, but none existed. Phillips could feel his knees weakening, his stomach churning, as if the fear itself had taken physical form, and Tanaka felt his chest tighten, every breath shallow and rapid, as he realized they were not facing a simple encounter, but a reckoning, a test of judgment and perception that they were ill-prepared for. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze cutting across them, in turn, unblinking, relentless, and the 4 cadets felt themselves drawn into a vortex of attention and power, a silent assessment of their character, their fears, and their weaknesses, and a low pulse seemed to vibrate through the room, echoing in their ears, in their bones, in their minds, as if the walls themselves were alive with expectation, and the 4 understood with bone-deep clarity that the next word she spoke would seal their fates and determine if they would emerge transformed or broken. Morales's hands trembled. Green's mind raced. Phillips's breath came fast and shallow, and Tanaka's body felt like lead, every instinct screaming for escape, yet bound by the unyielding presence in front of them, and the woman's. Lips moved, slowly forming words that promised revelation consequences and a lesson none of them would ever forget, and the 4 cadets sat frozen in the eye of a storm larger than anything they had ever faced, and the cafeteria waited with bated breath for her next move. The cafeteria held its breath, every cadet frozen in the moment, as if time itself had stopped, and the 4 at the table felt the weight of expectation pressing down like 1,000 invisible hands, and Morales could feel his chest tighten every breath. A struggle. Green felt his knees shake as if the floor itself had betrayed him. Phillips gripped the edge of the table so tightly his fingers ached, and Tanaka felt a cold fire burning through his veins, fear, adrenaline, and awe, all tangled together. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning each of them slowly, deliberately, and the 4 could feel her gaze peeling away every layer of pretense, every hidden thought, and the air around them seemed to hum alive with energy, vibrating in their bones, in their hearts, in their minds. And a faint whisper seemed to echo from the walls, a sound too low to be real, but it sent a shiver down their spines and made their pulse quicken with anticipation. Then she spoke a single phrase, low, calm, but heavy with authority, that made the cafeteria fall silent, as if even the walls were listening, and the 4 cadets felt their stomachs drop, a cold knot forming that told them with perfect clarity that their world had shifted, irrevocably. And in that instant, every fear, every doubt, every hesitation they had ever held was laid bare in front of her, and there was nowhere to hide. Morales tried to lift his eyes to meet hers, but the weight of the moment pinned him in place. Green's hands shook uncontrollably. Phillips felt his knees weaken, and Tanaka could barely draw a full breath, and the 4 of them understood with a terrifying clarity that she had known from the first moment they approached that nothing they had brought with them would protect them from what was coming, and the realization hit like a tidal wave, washing over every thought, every instinct, every plan they had ever made. Her hand moved slowly, lifting a finger toward them, a subtle gesture that carried more power than words could describe, and the shadows in the room seemed to lean closer, stretching across the walls, across the floor, across the ceiling, as if drawn toward her presence, and every cadet in the cafeteria could feel it, a silent force pressing against their senses, and the 4 at the table realized they were standing at the edge of something irreversible, something that would leave them forever changed. Then she spoke again, words that cut through the tension sharp, and deliberate, promising revelation and consequence. And the 4 felt their minds stretch beyond the limits of understanding, trying to grasp the magnitude of what she meant, and the air itself seemed to tremble, a low vibration resonating with fear, respect, and awe. And they knew that what was coming next would either break them or forge them into something stronger than they had ever imagined. Morales swallowed hard. Green exhaled slowly. Phillips's stomach twisted, and Tanaka felt a surge of energy racing through him. And for the first time in the entire encounter, a spark of understanding ignited in their minds that whatever had begun the moment they sat down was not punishment. It was a lesson, a reckoning, a test that would define who they truly were. And in that instant, the cafeteria seemed to exhale, releasing some of the tension, yet leaving behind a charged stillness as if the storm had passed. But the echoes remained. She leaned back finally, a faint smile tugging at her lips, and the 4 cadets felt a strange mix of relief, terror, and admiration, as if they had witnessed something beyond ordinary comprehension, and they realized that nothing would ever be the same again. And the 4 looked at each other, knowing that the encounter had changed them permanently, and the cafeteria lights flickered once more, casting long shadows across the floor and walls, and the silent question hung in the air, waiting for them to understand it fully.